And punishing you for symptoms of an undiagnosed medical condition would be cruel, not just. Sometimes the most powerful thing someone can say in a courtroom isn't a defense. It's the complete absence of one. Let me tell you about a morning when someone stood in front of me and refused to make excuses, refused to blame circumstances or bad luck or anyone else. Just took full responsibility for breaking the law over and over again until even I had to stop her. And what I discovered when I asked why, she kept saying, "I have no excuse," changed everything about how I saw her case. Her name was Margaret Sullivan, 67 years old, retired elementary school teacher, married for 43 years, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket in the past 30 years. But she was here because 3 days earlier, she'd run a red light at the intersection of Broadway and Pine Street. Not just ran, it flew through it at 50 miles per hour, without even slowing down. Nearly caused a 3-car accident. The file was straightforward. Margaret Ann Sullivan, failure to stop at red light, reckless driving, endangering public safety. Officer Davis had written a detailed report. Subject drove through red light at approximately 50 miles per hour without braking. Light had been red for approximately 4 seconds. Multiple vehicles had to brake suddenly to avoid collision. When stopped, subject was cooperative but seemed disoriented and confused about what she'd done. That last part, disoriented and confused, stuck with me. The intersection has cameras. I'd watched the footage. Margaret's silver Toyota Camry approaching the light clearly red. Cars stopped in the cross traffic, and Margaret driving straight through like the light didn't exist. 3 cars had to slam on their brakes. One swerved into the opposite lane to avoid hitting her. It was pure luck that nobody got hit. When Officer Davis pulled her over 2 blocks later, Margaret had been apologetic but seemed genuinely confused about what had happened. She kept saying, "I'm so sorry," but couldn't explain why she'd run the light. No alcohol, no drugs, clean toxicology. Just a 67-year-old woman who'd driven through a red light like she hadn't seen it at all. The morning Margaret Sullivan walked into my courtroom, I noticed something immediately. Thursday, 10:15 a.m. She came in with her husband, a tall man in his 70s, with white hair and kind eyes, who held her arm gently as they walked. Margaret moved slowly, carefully, like someone afraid of falling. She was dressed neatly, a blue cardigan, slacks, sensible shoes. Her hair was silver and carefully styled. She looked like someone's grandmother, which, according to the file, she was. 4 grandchildren. But what struck me was her face. She looked terrified. Not of me, or the courtroom, or the charges. She looked terrified of herself, like she didn't understand how she'd ended up here. Margaret Ann Sullivan, failure to stop at red light, reckless driving, endangering public safety. Margaret stood slowly, her husband steadying her. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Yes, Your Honor." "Mrs. Sullivan, do you understand these charges?" "Yes, Your Honor. I ran a red light. I endangered other drivers. I have no excuse." There it was. First time. "I have no excuse." "Mrs. Sullivan, do you have an attorney?" "No, Your Honor. I don't need one. I did what they said I did. I have no excuse for my behavior." Second time. Most people in traffic court spend 10 minutes explaining why the light was yellow, or the sun was in their eyes, or they were distracted by something important. But Margaret Sullivan just stood there saying she had no excuse. Officer Davis came forward to testify. "Your Honor, I observed the defendant's vehicle traveling eastbound on Broadway at approximately 2:30 p.m. The traffic signal at Pine Street was red, had been red for approximately 4 seconds. The defendant drove through the intersection at approximately 50 miles per hour without slowing or braking. What happened when you pulled her over?" "She was very cooperative, Your Honor. Pulled over immediately when I activated my lights. She seemed confused, kept asking me what she'd done wrong. When I told her she'd run a red light, she seemed genuinely shocked. Said she didn't remember seeing it." "Did she seem impaired?" "No, Your Honor. I administered a field sobriety test. She passed. No signs of alcohol or drug use. She was just confused. Scared. She kept apologizing and saying she didn't understand what had happened." Officer Davis paused. "Your Honor, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Most people I pull over for running red lights either know they did it or claim the light was yellow. Mrs. Sullivan genuinely seemed not to remember driving through that intersection. That concerned me. I looked at Margaret. She was staring at her hands, tears running quietly down her face. Mrs. Sullivan, Officer Davis says you didn't remember seeing the red light. Is that true? Margaret looked up, wiping her eyes. Your Honor, I don't remember the light at all. I don't remember that intersection. I remember getting in my car. I remember thinking I needed to go to the pharmacy. And then I remember Officer Davis at my window. Everything in between is just gone. Her husband squeezed her hand. I've watched the video footage, Your Honor. I saw myself drive through that red light. I saw how close I came to causing an accident, and I have no excuse. Third time, Mrs. Sullivan, why do you keep saying you have no excuse? Margaret's hands were shaking. Because I don't, Your Honor. I could have killed someone. I could have hit another car. I could have destroyed families. And I don't even remember doing it. That's not an excuse. That makes it worse. If I can't remember something that dangerous, I shouldn't be driving. I have no excuse. Fourth time. The courtroom was completely silent. Her husband was crying quietly beside her. Even Officer Davis looked affected. Mrs. Sullivan, have you seen a doctor about this memory loss? Margaret nodded. Yes, Your Honor. After Officer Davis pulled me over, I made an appointment with my doctor. I saw him 2 days ago. What did he say? Margaret's voice was barely audible. He referred me to a neurologist, Your Honor. He said the memory loss and confusion could be early signs of dementia. I have an appointment with a specialist next week. The word dementia hung in the air like a weight. Your Honor, Margaret continued, I know that doesn't excuse what I did. I could have killed someone. The fact that I don't remember it doesn't make it better. It makes it terrifying. If I can drive through a red light and not remember it, I'm a danger to everyone. I have no excuse. I'm guilty. And I should be punished. If you're watching this and you've ever watched someone you love face a devastating diagnosis with complete courage, subscribe to Judge Stories YT right now, because what I do next shows that sometimes justice requires understanding the difference between recklessness and tragedy. I had to take a moment, step away from the bench, because this wasn't about punishing someone for breaking traffic law. This was about a woman who'd spent 67 years as a law-abiding citizen facing the possibility that her mind was betraying her. When I came back, I'd made a decision. Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to understand something. You've said 4 times that you have no excuse. And you're right, what you did was dangerous. Running a red light at 50 miles per hour could have caused a terrible accident. Margaret nodded, accepting it. I know, Your Honor, but I'm not going to accept your guilty plea. Margaret looked shocked. Her husband looked up quickly. Even Officer Davis looked surprised. Your Honor, I don't understand. I ran the red light. I saw the video. I'm guilty. Mrs. Sullivan, you drove through that intersection with no memory of doing so. You didn't intentionally run that light. Something happened, whether it's dementia or something else, that caused a complete memory gap. That's not recklessness. That's a medical emergency. I looked at both of them. You didn't choose to have memory problems. Something is happening to you that's beyond your control, and punishing you for symptoms of an undiagnosed medical condition would be cruel, not just. Margaret was crying harder now. But, Your Honor, I endangered people. You did. And we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again. But not through punishment, through proper medical care. I turned to her husband. Mr. Sullivan, does your wife still drive regularly? He shook his head. No.
This is a rare judicial moment. Judges can refuse guilty pleas when punishment would be unjust. Here, the law bends, not to excuse danger, but to recognize illness instead of intent.
No, Your Honor, not since this happened. Margaret handed me her car keys that night and said, I can't be trusted anymore. She hasn't been behind the wheel since. I've been driving everywhere. Mr. Sullivan, you said she was going to pick up your medication when this happened. What medication? Heart medication, Your Honor. I had a heart attack 6 months ago. I take daily medication to manage it. Margaret always picks it up for me because the pharmacy is near her book club. Was near her book club. She stopped going after this happened. I looked at Margaret. This woman who'd been driving to pick up her husband's heart medication, taking care of him even as her own mind was failing. Mrs. Sullivan, here's what's going to happen. First, I'm suspending your license temporarily, pending medical evaluation. Not as punishment, but for safety. Margaret nodded. I understand, Your Honor. I shouldn't be driving. Second, you're going to see that neurologist next week, and you're going to have a complete evaluation. Whatever is causing these memory gaps needs to be identified and treated if possible. Yes, Your Honor. Third, I'm continuing this case for 90 days. After you've seen the neurologist and we know what we're dealing with, we'll reconvene. At that point, we'll determine next steps based on your medical condition. Your Honor, Margaret said quietly, what if it is dementia? What if there's no treatment? Then we'll deal with that when we know for certain. But Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to understand something. You didn't choose to have memory problems. Something is happening to you that's beyond your control, and punishing you for that would be wrong. Margaret was sobbing now. Your Honor, I don't deserve your kindness. I could have killed someone, but you didn't. And the fact that you're standing here taking full responsibility, saying I have no excuse 4 times, tells me everything I need to know about your character. You're someone facing a terrifying situation with more courage than most people could manage. Her husband was crying openly now. Mr. Sullivan, I need you to make sure your wife gets to that neurologist appointment, and I need you to keep her off the road until we know what we're dealing with. Can you do that? Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely. I've already been driving everywhere. I won't let her drive until we know she's safe. Good. Mrs. Sullivan, one more thing. Yes, Your Honor? Stop saying you have no excuse. What's happening to you isn't your fault. You're not a criminal. You're someone dealing with a medical condition. There's a difference. As Margaret was leaving, Officer Davis approached her. Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to know that when I wrote in my report that you seemed disoriented and confused, I was trying to document what I saw because it concerned me. I'm glad Judge Caprio is handling this the way he is. You need medical help, not punishment. Margaret wiped her face. Thank you, officer. Subscribe to Judge Stories YT, because what happens 3 months later proves that sometimes the most important thing a judge can do is see past the crime to the person who's suffering. 3 months later, Margaret and her husband came back to my courtroom. I could tell immediately that the news wasn't good. Margaret moved more slowly than before. Her husband held her arm constantly, and there was something in her eyes, a distance, a confusion that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Mr. Sullivan spoke first. Your Honor, we saw the neurologist, and then we saw 2 more specialists. We wanted to be certain. What did they say? His voice broke. Early onset Alzheimer's disease. The neurologist said the symptoms have been progressing for about a year, but we didn't notice because they were subtle. The incident with the red light was one of the more obvious signs that something was seriously wrong. Margaret sat quietly, holding her husband's hand. She seemed to be listening, but not fully present. How is she doing? Some days are better than others, Your Honor. She has good hours and bad hours. She's on medication that slows the progression, but there's no cure. The doctor said she shouldn't drive anymore. Ever. So we surrendered her license to the DMV last month. Mrs. Sullivan, do you understand what's happening? Margaret looked at me. For a moment, her eyes cleared. Yes. Your Honor, I have Alzheimer's. I'm losing my memory. Eventually, I'll lose everything. But right now, in this moment, I remember standing here 3 months ago. I remember saying I had no excuse. And I remember you being kind to me when you didn't have to be. Her clarity was heartbreaking because I knew it wouldn't last. Your Honor, Mr. Sullivan continued, we wanted to thank you. When this first happened, Margaret was convinced she was a criminal. She thought she deserved to go to jail. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Your decision to suspend the case and order medical evaluation instead of punishment that gave her permission to see this as an illness instead of a moral failure. He wiped his eyes. She's been able to face this diagnosis with dignity instead of shame, and that's because of you. I had to compose myself. Mr. Sullivan, given the medical diagnosis, I'm dismissing all charges against your wife. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't negligent. She was experiencing symptoms of a disease that she didn't know she had. Thank you, Your Honor. Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to know something. You came into this courtroom 3 months ago and said, I have no excuse, 4 times. You took responsibility even when you didn't understand what was happening. That took more courage than most people have. And I want you to remember, when you can remember, that you're not defined by this disease. You're defined by how you faced it. Margaret nodded slowly. Thank you, Judge. I'll try to remember that while I still can. 6 months later, I got a letter from Mr. Sullivan. Dear Judge Caprio, I'm writing to update you on Margaret's condition. The Alzheimer's has progressed significantly. She's now in a memory care facility where she can receive round-the-clock supervision. Most days, she doesn't remember me. She doesn't remember our children or grandchildren. She doesn't remember teaching elementary school for 30 years. But there are moments, brief, fleeting moments, when she becomes lucid. And in those moments, she sometimes talks about standing in your courtroom, about how you told her to stop saying she had no excuse, about how you saw her as a person dealing with illness instead of a criminal deserving punishment. I want you to know that your compassion during one of the worst periods of our lives gave us the strength to face what was coming. You helped Margaret see her diagnosis as a medical condition, not a character flaw. You gave her dignity when she felt she deserved none. Margaret's mind is leaving her, but in those rare moments when she returns to herself, she remembers kindness. She remembers being seen as human, and she remembers you. Thank you, Judge Caprio, for seeing my wife as a person, not just a traffic violation. With deepest gratitude, Robert Sullivan. I kept that letter. Read it when I need to remember why this job matters. A year later, I attended Margaret Sullivan's funeral. She was 69 years old. The Alzheimer's had progressed rapidly. The service was beautiful. Her 4 grandchildren spoke about the grandmother who'd taught them to read, who'd baked cookies every Sunday, who'd never missed a school play. Her former students spoke about the teacher who'd believed in them when no one else did. Her husband spoke last. He was 80 now, aged by grief. Margaret spent her entire life following rules and doing the right thing. She was a teacher for 30 years, never late, never missed a day, raised 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and then Alzheimer's took her mind, made her do things she would never have done, made her dangerous without meaning to be. When she ran that red light, she was devastated, not because she got caught, but because she could have hurt someone. She kept saying, I have no excuse, because that's who she was, someone who took responsibility even when circumstances were beyond her control. Judge Caprio saw what was really happening. He saw past the traffic violation to the person who was suffering. He gave Margaret permission to face her diagnosis with dignity instead of shame. And for that, our family will be eternally grateful. After the service, Margaret's son approached me. Judge Caprio, when Mom got that citation, she was suicidal. She kept saying she was a danger to society. She couldn't see that she was sick. Your decision to treat her medical condition instead of her traffic violation saved her. Not physically, nothing could stop the Alzheimer's, but emotionally. You gave her peace in her final years. My father always told me, Frank, sometimes people come into your courtroom broken by circumstances beyond their control, and your job isn't to break them further. It's to see the whole person. Margaret Sullivan said, I have no excuse, 4 times, because she was the kind of person who took responsibility for everything, even things she couldn't control, even a disease that was stealing her mind. But the truth was, she did have an excuse, a medical one. Alzheimer's disease doesn't care about your character or your history. It just takes and takes until nothing is left. My job that day wasn't to punish a 67-year-old woman for running a red light. It was to see that she wasn't a reckless driver. She was a sick woman who didn't know yet just how sick she was. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, when someone stands in front of you saying, I have no excuse, over and over, ask yourself why. Sometimes it's because they're terrified of what's happening to them and don't know how to ask for help. Look past the words to the fear beneath them. Because sometimes, I have no excuse really means I don't understand what's happening to me and I'm scared. Thanks for listening, and God bless.